So yeah, I've just set the record for this now. Now that I've learned how to pull it off my computer. Amanda, I've got 10 o'clock. I know you've gone to mute on my phone. I don't know if you'd like me to just get started now.
Sorry, I couldn't find my screen there. Yes, I think we're definitely good to get started.
Just to get going. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to kick it off. Good morning, everybody. And I've been saying to Amanda, I don't know what it's like where everybody's sitting right now, but it's absolutely gorgeous and sunny. So beautiful Wednesday. And this is the last workshop in the series. I recognize some names and faces of people that have maybe been through the whole three, which is great. I will try and do a little bit of a recap very quickly because these workshops were designed to kind of tie into one another. So if you're new onto this call, my name is Wendy Malkin. I have a business called HR Annex Consulting, and I work with different organizations and companies in sort of business HR related topics. So I provide different services to companies on that. And one of them is things like this, doing workshops. So I'm going to put a big caveat on the retention workshop. I mean, I think, as we know, we've got about an hour here. I do want to leave some time at the end, maybe for some more questions, given that we're at the end of the series, to make sure that we capture everything. Or if there are questions you have after, obviously to follow up with Amanda and the team in the economic development group there. For sort of a one-on-one. We're going to just sort of obviously be able to touch on subject areas and topics within this workshop. You could take probably any of the things we talk about today and sort of drill down into a lot more detail. So we're just intended to give you a little bit of a flavor and sort of, as we said, this was a bit of a check-in, help people do a bit of a check-in on their systems. So with that, I'm going to dive right in. So we're going to talk about orientation and onboarding for a little bit. Again, this may be something you've already got in place, but there may be some tips and ideas that come out of that you want to just go back and take a look at your current process and activities in that area. We're going to talk about building engagement. And we're going to talk about protecting your investment right at the beginning with the workshop around attraction. I mean, this is a big investment when you hire people into your business in terms of cost to your business. And so, you want to make sure that if you've gone through the process of attracting talent and hiring talent, that you're able to retain the talent and sort of retain that investment in your business. So there are some things we can talk about there for you to consider. So I've already said this one's about retaining talent, and the idea here is any questions, we'll try and capture those as we go, either through the chat line, or you can certainly put your hand up on mute and have ask the question, and we'll try and leave some time towards the end as well to maybe open it up for questions, given that we are sort of in the last of the three workshops, and if you've been on all three, there may be some questions that are carrying over from the previous two workshops. Okay, I'm just going to jump right through this. So we ended the last session around hiring talent. And obviously, once you've made that selection and hiring decision, you need to bring this person into your organization. So there's sort of two words are interchangeable. People talk about orientation, people talk about onboarding, but really it's all about engaging employees from day one. And in this retention workshop, that's going to be kind of that recurring theme. The retention is really about engaging people, making them want to stay, want to be with the organization, think twice if they were considering leaving, making them, have a compelling reason for them to stay with the organization, and creating that through right from day one, how you bring them into the organization and get them oriented to their job, through to day-to-day operations and support, and throughout their career with your business. So just to do a really quick recap from the previous two workshops, we've talked about changing trends, what's happening in the workspace, understanding multi-generational workforces, and that's particularly true around engagement, particularly true around things that are important to the individual in the organization and sort of meeting the needs of employees, while at the same time, obviously, addressing the needs of the business. And we've talked before about multi-generational workforces. Each of those different generations kind of have areas of interest to them that you may need to be considering as you bring them into your organization. We talked about candidate connections. You know, if you think about retention and where it starts, it really starts with that job posting. It starts with a hiring process and how somebody feels, you know, they've been managed through that process, and making those candidate connections. You know, this is a person to person, you know, situation when you're looking at building that working relationship with somebody. So you can't sort of bypass that human connection, even though sometimes it's virtual versus in person. Diversifying who and how you recruit staff. We've talked about that. We also talked about an interview guide. These are all tools, tips, and I think the materials would be available to you if you weren't in the previous 2 workshops to be able to go back and take a look. And I think Amanda's put together some really good overview guides to kind of pull out the key points. But we talked about that process of interviewing and selection. And I know a number of you on the chat on the last call are clearly aware and familiar with the concept of behavioral-based interviewing, which helps you kind of get to the root of, is this somebody who could actually come in and perform the job the way that it needs to be? And then creating that new hire checklist. And we talked briefly, as I said in the last session, we concluded or ended on onboarding. So we're going to pick it up from there. And so when we talk about orientation and onboarding, there are kind of 2 areas to this. And I'd like to say orientation, think about that as the what somebody needs to know when they come into your organization. And then think about onboarding as maybe how, you know, they need to be integrated or brought into the business. So again, orientation is, you know, it's a standard introduction to the company. If you don't already have like a day 1 orientation when somebody starts with your business, this may be something that you want to take a look at, or as we said, this is kind of check under the hood, if the things that you want to add. But you want to share key information quickly with staff when you bring them into your business. You want to orient them to the work site. Again, you're trying to get somebody up to speed as quickly and efficiently as possible so they can start to contribute. So where to find things, who to contact, information that they need to know. You're starting to introduce them in orientation to the company culture. So sharing things like a vision or a mission statement or value statement that you may have for your organization. And again, this isn't about reinventing the wheel, just taking a look at what you have in place, because that really helps set the tone for the individual joining your business. And hopefully that's been included already when you were job posting, already through the interviewing process. So when they get to onboarding and orientation, or onboarding and orientation to the business, you know, this is where you continue to expand on what the company culture is all about. And we say orientation could typically be a one-time event. It might be that sort of one day, day 1. You could do it with multiple staff, depending on your business. If you're seasonal, maybe you're bringing a bunch of people on together. Your business may not be as seasonal, and so you could be bringing one in at a time. But essentially, it's a similar process that you would do for each person coming into the business. Then onboarding is really where we're talking about customizing the integration into the organization. So it's a job orientation. It's more focused on the specific job that somebody's going to be doing. So that could be work instructions, that could be policies and procedures. You know, we'll talk a little bit about training, but it's really onboarding tends to be a little more customized, and the orientation tends to be a little more general across, you know, multiple people, multiple parts of the business. You're going to establish clear expectations as part of onboarding, which is really important to sort of set from day 1 and early into the employment relationship. What is expected of the individual, both as a person within the team, but also as somebody who needs to be delivering in their role. So what their roles and responsibilities are, which then speaks to things like job descriptions, work instructions that I've already mentioned, so we can talk a little bit more about that. You start to begin your relationship building in onboarding. So this is with your boss, it could be with peers, other key stakeholders. So you're starting to introduce the individual to people either within the organization or externally to the organization. They're kind of key in them being able to get their work done, and people that they kind of need to know and be aware of. It could be across departments, so it's really around building relationships, and you would build a plan around how you would start to introduce people to these other individuals. And you begin to assimilate somebody into the company norms. Now, I mean, I've worked in lots of different organizations, as I'm sure many of you have on the call, and there are kind of what I call the written and the unwritten norms or rules in a company. So there's a lot of things that are written down, but then there are also just things people need to know that are not necessarily written, and they're more custom kind of situations. So they could be how we celebrate people's birthdays. I mean, they're not necessarily key to how the organization operates on a day-to-day basis, but they're very important to how the business handles certain situations and what type of things occur in that sort of scenario. And people just knowing what happens in that situation, so they're not kind of caught off guard. So that's when we talk about norms. And then typically onboarding is going to be multiple events. So we talked in the previous workshop about 30, 60, and 90-day onboarding processes or activities. And that's because depending on the job, it may be very easy to orient somebody to a job that is quite straightforward, quite simple in nature, okay, versus a job that maybe has more complexity or a wider span of control. So it may take somebody a little longer to get up to speed into a job that, let's say, has a wider breadth or span of control or degree of responsibility. So they're not going to get everything day one. They may not get everything in the first 30 days, the first 4 weeks on the job. But the idea here is that really you're looking to think through what is it they need to know, how can we best get them that information, get them involved, get them engaged, start to make them feel like they're part of the organization, and you would build out an onboarding plan to cover that off. So just touching back on orientation, and again, we talked about this a little bit in the last session. These are some of the things you're seeing listed here to consider for orientation. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. Obviously, for your organization, you may have some very specific things to your business that need to be included, but essentially back to the idea of what they need to know or information they need to have sooner rather than later, you would want to probably look at including that in the orientation package or the orientation event that you would set up. I mean, I've been in businesses where day one you walk in and your workstation, there's actually quite literally a file folder that has, all this documentation, access to information, contact list, that type of thing, maps even of the local area. It's interesting, when somebody starts a new job, they might also be starting to be in a new part of the town. And so simple things like where the local bank is, where the hospital is, where the medical centers are, places to go grab some lunch if you don't have any facilities on site. So those types of things are always kind of nice to include in an orientation package. So you can create whatever makes sense for your business, but these are things that you might want to consider for orientation. And in the onboarding process, again, the idea here is you want to bring this person into the business as quickly and as easily as possible, give them the tools, give them the information, start to make those relationship connections. And really, I've highlighted here, building confidence from day one, okay? You went through that process of attracting when you were out there recruiting and you were out there with your job posting and you kind of marketed and sold your business to somebody, and you set a number of expectations in that person's mind during the course of your conversation. So when they come into your business, really you want to kind of follow through on what you've already sort of put out there in the previous two sessions. And you want to really reinforce to somebody that they've made a good choice, right? Not only have you made the right choice as the employer to bring this person on board, but they've also made a good choice as the employee to join your organization. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times though that I have seen and I have heard, employees, especially new hires coming back, and they feel as though they've been thrown in the deep end. It's nobody had time to talk to me. I sat there at my desk or at my workstation, you know, and it was really confusing. So I think it's just, again, when you're kind of checking under the hood and you're checking your current process, you know, making sure that you're not necessarily throwing somebody down into the deep end. I mean, there's definitely some times where somebody is going to just have to read a work instruction. You've hired somebody with skills and ability and hopefully previous experience, you know, that they should be able to apply and transfer to your organization. But the issue is there's the way in which you do it in your business. And so it's just making sure that from day one, you're helping that person get brought into the organization. The other aspect with onboarding is having a consistent approach for all employees. So be fair and reasonable. So you can't just have one group thrown in and another group go through a more comprehensive exercise. You know, all roles are important. There's a need to make sure that
Try it.
I think we've got somebody.
No, is it septic or septic? Septic. Oh no, septic. Yeah, go septic.
Sorry. Do we have somebody who's not on mute? If we can get them on mute, I'm not sure that I can put you on mute.
I think it might be Jairus.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway,
okay.
Everybody's heard. If we can kind of just make sure we're on mute, unless you've got a question you want to bring up to the group. Okay, thanks. So essentially, we'll move on from this, but you want to build engagement early, and you want to, reduce any risk of early turnover.
And if you did sleep, you would have gotten that.
Okay. Let me just see if
I think if you click the three little dots, you might be able to.
I'm gonna see if I can put everybody on mute.
Yeah, or mute all might be an option.
It doesn't give me a mute all on this, which is interesting. So
if you hover over his box there and you click the three dots, does it allow you to mute?
It does not allow me to mute.
Oh, he's muted himself now.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Muted. Awesome. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Okay, so let's move on. So in terms of onboarding, again, these are just things to check, tips, right? So meetings with the supervisor, the direct manager. I don't know how many of you may have a buddy system with a coworker that you set up. I mean, the supervisor, their manager may be incredibly busy, totally understand that. They still need to get time with their supervisor, but having a buddy set up from day one that they can work with over a number of weeks is really important, because that person hopefully can help answer some of their questions and allows them, again, that idea of getting sort of into the organization and into their role faster. Training, instructions on specific job tasks. I mean, some organizations, people don't actually start physically doing their job until they've completed whatever necessary training, which could be anything from health and safety related, anything specific to job tasks or being tested. I worked in one organization, it was a manufacturing, where, for example, somebody had to actually physically go through the full set of job tasks, and they were assessed before they were actually kind of released out on the line, if you will, because of the impact to the organization if they didn't quite get things right. You know, there was sort of a big risk to the business. So again, you're trying to set people up for success. You would understand what your training needs are. We talk about test or beginner projects. Again, depends on the job. Let's say, for example, you have a business where you've got somebody who's involved in multimedia, social media type activities, for example. So there may be projects that you can assign to them fairly early into their role, where they can go out there, do a test in the sense of do a smaller project, be able to learn anything from that they need to. And that, again, is all about building their confidence. And then they would obviously progress to more larger, more complex roles and assignments until they're eventually fully up to speed. Evaluations. I don't know how many folks do evaluations, assessing new hires' performance. They could be very simple check-in type evaluations. They could be very simple observational, watching somebody do tasks, etc., right the way through to kind of a sit down and more of a formalized, you know, how's it going assessment type situations. But I think it's really important early on, as somebody comes into the business, that you do have a method or a means for being able to kind of assess performance, because being able to call things early, and we'll talk about that a little later, is really critical if somebody's getting off track, to make that call sooner rather than later for the business and for the employee. Okay. Goal setting, I've talked about that before. It depends on the job complexity. Some job tasks are easy to learn within a very short period of time, given the nature of the job. Others are a little more complex. So again, you may need to build out the onboarding plan for sort of a longer time frame, depending on what the nature of the job is. So just in terms of takeaways on that particular topic of onboarding and orientation, you know, it helps build engagement, and engagement is what ties into the whole issue of retention. And so it gets a new hire up to speed. Orientation is really about need to know and what, okay? And onboarding allows those opportunities to build relationships and start to build their confidence and start to let them become part of the team. So it's kind of how they need to sort of operate within the business. I just see there's a chat comment here. I don't know if it's one we answered already. Oh, no, perfect, it was. Okay, so we'll move into the next session. Or next section, I should say. So this is kind of talking more around the retention, even though I'm using the term engagement. So retention, just to put it into context, you know, it's really around how you encourage, keep people within your organization, so they don't leave your business, essentially. And from an HR perspective, business perspective, you may be familiar with this already. It's really around building that engagement. And engagement with an employee is going to come through the culture of your business and the work environment, which is a number of different things that go into that. And we're going to talk a little bit about both. But it's really designed around retaining your staff. So the earlier you can get somebody engaged, and again, I'm going to kind of keep repeating, if you think about this as a process, you engage them with your job posting, you got them interested in your organization enough that they applied, went through the interviewing and hiring process. Obviously, that one-on-one conversation through the interview and the hiring process continued their interest, their engagement. There was a reason for them wanting to join your business, and now they come into your organization, and it's continuing to build on that engagement so that people are encouraged to stay within your organization. So one of the interesting things is, you know, particularly post-pandemic, there's lots of different articles that you can read. This one's kind of interesting from MIT. It's all around toxic workplace culture. And I will tell you from an HR perspective, you know, people absolutely will leave for money. That's definitely a motivator for a certain percentage of the population, and they'll always be chasing, if you will, the bigger paycheck, and that's fine. That's what motivates that particular individual. But for a lot of employees, it really comes down to the culture and the work environment, which we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, that really impacts their decision around whether they go or stay. And it's a lot of different things. So again, in the spirit of checking your organization in your mind as we go through this, and maybe there are some hints and tips or things for you to consider, that's great. But your culture is going to be very unique to your business. And so I can't kind of give you a one size fits all, but I can talk sort of conceptually around things that you might want to be considering around, you know, reducing or eliminating anything that potentially could be viewed as what they call toxic in the workplace, okay? So I've got a question, and I don't know, in the spirit of this format, whether we can put it in the chat or people may be comfortable just unmuting and speaking up, but I just wanted to take a moment around company culture because it's kind of this broad statement. So how would you define culture? And maybe if you think about your organization and reflect a little bit, how would you define the culture of your company that you work for, that you own, that you manage, etc.? And I'll kind of pause as I go through this. We'll get to the end, and maybe if people have thoughts or questions, that would be great. So what is it that makes up a company's culture? What are some of the things when you think about your business that goes into your culture? Okay, it's kind of in the DNA. It's kind of how your company identifies what's important to your organization that is part of that culture. Great. you got a chat in here. I'm gonna take a look. If I can. Okay, so we've got comment here from Jairus. That's great. A mission, an employee promise. So that's really interesting. I don't know, Jairus, if you even want to mute or can mute. When you talk about an employee promise, what does that mean within your organization? Or we can come back to that at the end if you want. I mean, I like it. I think it's a great statement, because it is really, when you think about the employment relationship, it is a commitment between the company and the employee. It's not just an employee contract. There's a lot of things that go into what we commit to our employees. So an employee promise. So that's great. Can company culture change over time? Oh, okay, Amanda.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I saw something come up in the chat here, and it's likely what I was going to mention. So Kaylee says how the company relates to its people and how they relate to one another. And I agree, bouncing off of that, I think culture really boils down to that. Even though this is a company and there's professionalism, there's that personal connection where an employee feels heard, safe, respected, and that's kind of a mutual, from leadership and throughout a company. I think that's what I would say culture is.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I mean, like I said, this, we've got an hour today. There's a huge conversation around culture. And as I've said, everybody's organization is unique and it was set up uniquely. And, the culture is specific to your organization, but it is something that people do get a sense of when they join your business. They definitely, if they've worked in different organizations, they do get a sense of different cultures from one organization, to another. What's important. I think that's great. Somebody's saying here, appreciating the gifts each person brings and the synergy. That's a great comment. And the sum is more than the parts.
Hey, Wendy.
Yeah.
I know with one work culture that I was involved with just in the last year.
Yeah.
It was a large factory. At any rate, it was relax and get the work done.
Yep.
And we would have engineers and production staff have a bad day.
Yep.
And they were no questions asked. You went upstairs and you played ping pong for 20 minutes.
Yep.
Blow off that steam. Everyone was like, oh, come back into work. Good to go.
Yeah.
And,
I mean,
that was a culture that I wasn't used to. I'm used to get in, get it done, or get out the door.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it took about 6 weeks to accept that work culture.
Yeah.
And it was rewarding after the fact.
Yeah.
Really
I mean, that's an awesome sort of example, Andy, right? As you said, you're used to a different culture in another organization. You come into this organization that allows people the flexibility and the opportunity to kind of step away, blow off some steam. They're even maybe encouraged to do that. That's part of like the norm. It's part of the expectation. Look, if you're having a bad day, rather than, manifesting it out in the work, the shop floor or the workplace, go take a minute, walk around the building, go play ping pong, whatever it is. But it's encouraging people to step away and kind of, take the time out, which is great, because at the end of the day, all that does is further strengthen the working relationships and respect and teamwork and, and leadership. So again, this is why culture is kind of a really interesting thing. I mean, I've worked in different industries. I've been in heavy manufacturing. I've been in industries of medical device. I've been in companies that are owned by foreign national organizations that have a very different culture. For example, I had a Swiss-owned company that I worked for in Mississauga. And so it was a very formal, Swiss formal, but we went through a merger scenario that we hired it or merged with a California-based organization. So just imagine Switzerland meets Southern California. It's like formal meets hippy dippy. People are having arguments over how many waste bins they should have and all sorts of weird and wonderful conversations. But it was this cultural, the need to sit down and sort out what the cultural values, the cultural norms were going to be for the organization going forward. So it's a really interesting conversation, but I think that's a great example and appreciate that, Andy, you sharing that with us. Yep, and I think people are also agreeing on giving people that time to sort things out. So company culture, can certainly change over time when you have a change in leadership, when you have a change, for example, if there is a merger scenario, there's a change in just the number, the employee demographics. We talked before, or I talked before, about an organization where we had a large percentage of the population that would retire all around the same time, and so you would be hiring in new people. So culture is a kind of dynamic thing, but typically there are some core values or core aspects to a culture that remain somewhat, let's say, unchanged over time, but there are some sort of subtle nuances that happen. So it's a really interesting subject, to be honest. So how employees buy into the company culture, I think you gave a great example there, Andy, right? This wasn't something that I would have seen before. I saw it happen. I had to kind of think about it. I had to take a little bit of time to get used to it. So that is the issue. People do need a bit of time to buy into the company culture. They need to see it reinforced. They need to see cause and effect. If I do this, does this actually happen? Do they follow through on their word? Yeah, had a bad day, took a moment out, felt good about it. So again, people buy into the company culture, and they also buy out of it when they think it's not being followed or backed up. So one definition for a company culture, and people have been kind of sharing that in the chat, which is great, is a shared set of values, goals, attitudes, and practices. That's kind of a definition around culture. And again, it's going to be unique for each of your businesses. And so, this is just reinforcing that, what's important, a set of deliverables, giving people common goals. We're all striving towards the same thing. My individual contribution towards that, it's clear to me what I have to do. I know what our group has to do. Attitude plays a big part in culture, what the expected behaviors are. And there's kind of also these practices. What are your processes, your procedures, your how-tos of how the business operates are also very important when you're kind of helping to define culture. And somebody already, I think, mentioned it in the chat. There's also this diversity of thought and experience. And there's a lot of conversation and chat in social media and the news and everything at the moment around, this issue of diversity. To me, it goes beyond any kind of gender-based conversations, although those are very important. It really is around, when you think about your culture, it really is this diversity of thought and experience that everybody brings into the business. And how do you harness that? And you create a framework of what's expected, and you allow people to kind of buy into your company culture. And I've put an arrow to the side because really a lot of this also does come down to leadership, right? And ensuring that these things get reinforced constructively, positively in the organization. So we've talked about building employee engagement, and this all contributes towards the issue of retention. And, this also ties back into the previous workshops around, we build it and we create a compelling story. We did that again in the job posting, in the hiring, a reason to believe. When somebody comes into the organization, we do that also through our orientation and our onboarding processes. We make those connections. We start to build that trust. We provide clear expectations and the necessary tools. And I think a big one is we measure and celebrate the wins. We get so busy and so caught up in the day-to-day and just trying to make the business run efficiently and work. It's really important to celebrate those wins, and they don't have to be expensive or hugely time-consuming. They can be really small things that you can just put in place, but that becomes part of your culture where we celebrate our wins. And then the other piece that I would say, particularly from an HR perspective, is what I call these feedback loops. And it may be different for each of your organizations, but it really is important to have feedback mechanisms in whatever format makes sense for your business, so that you are listening to what happens on the shop floor, out in the field, in the office, wherever your employees are working, so that you can get that information and that feedback as soon as, and if necessary, take whatever action you need to take on that. I would say from an HR perspective, that's one of the biggest issues that would have ever come through my office is, somebody coming in, I'm not being listened to, they're not paying attention, inconsistency, et cetera, et cetera. And the first question is, well, have you had a conversation? Have they approached? No. So you got to get people sitting down and having the conversations. So key takeaways really around this issue of engagement, is checking your culture. I'm not going to prescribe, certainly in this workshop, what you should or shouldn't have, but it really is around, what makes it unique for your business? What is it that you want to encourage, foster, nurture, right, within your organization around the culture that makes it the place that people want to work. They want to stay with your business because the culture is such that they feel very positive. And you create an environment where people thrive, right? So we talked about shared values, the common goals, the attitude, and the practices. So this all, again, speaks to that investment piece of your people assets, right, in the business. So the next section is this issue of protecting your investment, right? So I'm going to call this your toolkit. And again, we could dive into each of these and kind of go into more detail. I'm going to give you some high-level thoughts for each of them, but I'm going to call this ticket to entry, right? So this should be when you think of your organization and you think of the tools that you have to engage with your employees. This is kind of your toolkit, okay? And again, it can be unique for each of your businesses, but essentially you've got leadership in your toolkit, you've got operational guidance, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, organizational guidance, communication and feedback loops, and what I would call an engaging workspace, right? So where I work is just as important as what I'm perhaps getting to do in my job. And I've worked in some very, I was in Liverpool, I have to share, I worked in a manufacturing, we supplied into Ford, it was automotive, and right outside my office were two 5,000-ton presses, molding presses that ran constantly and leaked oil. They were bunded to the max. If anybody's in manufacturing or any kind of that business, they know what that means. It's just basically trying to keep the oil and everything from flowing out onto the shop floor. It was just crazy because it was a very old plant. And I mean, that was just a crazy work environment to be in. I mean, the work was really good. The people were awesome. But I got to tell you, walking in there every day, and I'm not adverse to being on the shop floor, but the sound and just the noise level was just crazy. So thinking about the workspace is really important. That's kind of an extreme example. But I've also been in manufacturing facilities where you could eat off the shop floor. I mean, they were pristine. So it really just depends on the nature of your business and what you have a degree of control over, but it's something to consider. So leadership, I'm going to touch on each of these fairly quickly. Again, I wanted to leave some time today, given that we're at the end of the 3 workshops for any questions that may be still coming up for people. I'm highlighting a couple things around leadership from an HR perspective. So this sounds a little harsh, but you think about the culture. Holding people accountable, right? I mean, people want to be held accountable. People want clear instruction. They want to know when they're doing something well. They want to know when maybe they're getting off track. Okay, and they want very clear direction. So what is it you need me to do? How is it you need me to do it? I mean, there is a degree of interpretation that's allowed clearly because you've got free thinking, capable individuals in there that you trust to do the job right, but you need to hold people accountable. The number of conversations I have from an HR perspective that started off with, so-and-so isn't meeting my expectations, and you kind of have to go, well, were you clear? And it's like, well, yeah. And then you bring the person in and you go, well, was it clear to you what was expected in this instance? And the answer is, well, no, it wasn't really clear. So again, I probably spent a lot of my time bringing people into the room together to kind of talk it through, right? So, you can't expect to hold somebody accountable if you haven't been clear on what those expectations are. Okay. Teachable moments, call them coaching moments, counseling moments, but opportunities to teach are valuable. You know, turning a situation into an opportunity to help somebody further develop a skill, that investment, that is what keeps people in an organization. People are paying attention. It matters. It's important to them. So it's important to me. I feel valued. You're looking for those teachable moments. And I talked earlier about making the tough calls early. Again, from an HR perspective, I will tell you that, and I have a phrase that I would use with people in the business. I call it the wounded antelope at the watering hole. Everybody else in the organization knows this person's got a problem, but nobody's taking any action. And if you want to disenfranchise or disengage a larger part of your population, is when, from a leadership standpoint, those tough calls aren't being taken early. And by tough calls, they could be everything from needing to sit down with somebody, reset those expectations, holding them accountable, calling them on whatever's going on, and looking for a constructive way to try and resolve and work it through, right the way through to this is just not working out. And quite honestly, no harm, no foul. This is not the organization or the role for you to be in. So we need to part ways. But leaving these things on the table to kind of fester, one of the fastest ways I would say to kind of disenfranchise certainly more than that individual. And that is a potential risk and cost to your business. Okay. So operational guidance, this is pretty straightforward. But when I certainly talk to organizations, they don't always have some of these things in place. So again, this is just a check in your toolkit. You know, having work instructions, how to, that helps with training, that helps with setting expectations, that helps with managing performance, onboarding people. Just, do you have these things in place? KPIs, again, I'm going to use businesses I've been in. You know, I could have people down on the shop floor that could tell me to the penny what the scrap value is, what the inventory turns were. They know the business inside out. This is a huge asset to your business, what your employees know and the knowledge they have of your operations and your operational effectiveness as an organization. So if you don't have things like metrics and KPIs or key performance indicators, if you don't have those things in place, consider putting them in, because they really focus people and they really focus the conversations, and they help, again, manage some of those expectations in the organization. And people can have some fun with them too. We used to have competitions, who's closest to the scrap. It was like those game shows, right? Getting within $1 or $2 of what the actual scrap numbers were, as an example. But they could be bookings, they could be customer satisfaction ratings. There's lots of different businesses, lots of different metrics that you can put in place if you don't already have them. Organizational guidance. This is, again, when you look at your toolkit, that you've got policies and procedures around how you develop and manage people, and your legal requirements. So there are violence in the workplace, health and safety policies. There are certain things that you're obligated to have. So you just need to make sure you put all of these things in place, because again, we put it into the context of retaining staff. We put it into the context of engaging employees and creating the right culture and creating the right environment for people to succeed. You need some of these frameworks. You need this information, because it gives people focus and direction and instruction, which is important, right? And goals and objectives. And again, I'm going to say on that and go back to holding people accountable, right? And if people get off track, which they do, that's fine. Is it a teachable moment? Is it an opportunity to bring somebody back on track? Or is it a need to have another conversation? But people tend, I find, sometimes to avoid those discussions. And I would just say, again, check what your process is currently, or how effective you believe it is. And then the organizational KPIs, just like your operational ones, so key performance indicators. I don't know how many of you have any of these, but just like your financials, probably you have financial indicators. You should consider having organizational indicators. So they could be things around employee engagement, promotion, turnover, things that allow you to track and pinpoint and catch something before it starts to get potentially out of control or impacting engagement in the organization. And then communication and feedback loop. So I kind of open it up here, you know, do people have feedback loops in your organization, whether those are individuals or group and team ones? I mean, how do you handle communications? Is it all done through a team talk? Is it done through the internet? Could be lots of different ways to do it. It's just simply considering how you're communicating. People not getting the information they need or feeling like they're out of the loop is a way to kind of, again, disenfranchise, disengage people. And if you're trying to retain and you want to engage and you want to, people connect to the business, communications is kind of a key. What's happening in the business. Surveys sounds a bit formal, could be very informal. SurveyMonkey, there's lots of simple tools you could use to do a quick five question check-in if you don't have the time to go and talk to everybody individually or pull people off the job. There may be ways that you can do some quick surveys. And I've been with organizations that do very complex and very comprehensive surveys on an annual basis. And they use them as part of their operational measures for success, quite frankly. Walk the floor. Again, given the nature of your business, walk the floor may be outdoors and you have an outdoor activity base, but again, being outside, it's being visible from a leadership perspective, being visible so people are aware you're available to talk. I mean, again, it's that opportunity to kind of keep people engaged, keep people connected. I don't know how many people use exit interviews, but it's another one to consider in your toolkit around making sure that you're getting any feedback from people. Now, people go, yeah, but they're unhappy, they left, I'm not going to get a good interview. Potentially, yes, but potentially they could provide some nuggets of information that are important. If you're getting enough of them, it could be something to pay attention to. And checking company reputation. When people are out recruiting and people are out hiring, if they didn't have a good experience through the hiring process or they didn't have a good experience within the organization, chances are it's like customer retention, right? They're telling two friends. So, if there's a means for you to be able to check reputation, then that's great. I put a little caveat on the engaging workspace, and I talked about it before with my example when I worked in the manufacturing and the environment that I was in. 5S, that's a very manufacturing kind of term. Basically what it means is that everything has its place. In other words, sometimes when you see those tool boards and they've drawn the shape of the pliers and the hammer and that's where everything goes. It's a similar concept and it can be applied to any business, any organization. That there's a place for everything and everything has its place. And this is just around, again, efficiency, giving people the tools they need, access, they know where to find. It helps them be productive. It helps them feel confident. It helps them feel like people are paying attention. Physical layout and design, again, may be out of your control given the nature of your business, but to what degree you have control, consider physical layout and design. Allowing spaces for meeting places. I think, the earlier example of where somebody needed to step away. If you have a very open type business and there aren't a lot of closed door spaces, I mean, it could be something. I used to have somebody that would say, let's take a walk around the building, right? Obviously not in -10 blowing a blizzard, but I mean, there are ways and means to kind of create spaces where you can have those confidential private discussions that need to be had. And then something as simple as cleanliness and safety, just regular maintenance and upkeep, just keeping on top of everything. Those all send messages back to your employee around how engaged you are in their well-being and ensuring that they are being taken care of. So this last slide is where I wanted to maybe spend, we got about 10 minutes before we finish up, where I thought we might be able to have a little bit of conversation or comment from people if they had time. I tried to take some of the comments that I've been hearing around the region from different employers I've been working with. And I mean, these are not necessarily meant to be the solution, but it really is around maybe getting creative with solutions. So I thought I'd kind of throw these out there. So I'm going to just start with the first one really quickly. Transportation's an issue. So I don't know if anybody has, maybe you can comment or show in the chat, have you done anything like carpooling? Any discussions around shared transportation services? And that could be as far as the comment I have at the bottom, business to business, and this could be somewhere in discussions with Amanda or other parts of the regional municipal government. she says, you know, there could be some conversations around this to help employers out. I know there are lots of conversations that are going on in the background. I've sat in a number of these kind of planning meetings with various people, and it's been interesting to listen to. But transportation, you know, could be, are there ways to kind of tackle issues of transportation? And this is, again, the concept here is taking away some of the excuses potentially for people to leave your business, right? Or the opposite, providing solutions for people to come into your business and stay within your business. So staff availability, so full-time equivalent, that's FTE hours. So I had two employers that we were talking with, and they both had staff that did spa services. One could not provide, one employer could only provide so many hours, and the same with another one. And so there was a conversation that was had between those two businesses, because the core skill sets were the same for the individuals or for the position. They had a conversation around, look, I can give somebody 3 days a week, and I can give somebody 2 days a week. So between the two of us, they get 5 days a week. And so it doesn't necessitate somebody leaving either of those employers. They're able to work around or work out a creative way of doing their staffing. And as I say that, I'm well aware concerns around comp. I'm well aware like a job rate or any confidentiality. I mean, these opportunities aren't without a little bit of, you know, creative thinking and coming up with a reasonable working solution that would satisfy everybody. But it's in the spirit of being able to retain staff. And as I said, either taking away reasons for them to leave or providing them with reasons to stay. You know, if there could be a creative solution put in place. So the issue of compensation is always a hot one. You know, the base rate, what we call job hopping or pay hopping, you know, they're looking for another dollar. I mean, that could be an opportunity. And we talked, I think, in the first session around automation of work or rethinking how work is done. And again, Amanda's got the material from those previous sessions to maybe go back and have a little bit of a think through or a review on. But I'm going to call it automating what I call the non-value added work, or simply looking at how your business runs and say, look, I don't actually need a physical resource to do this work. There's another solution which might free up money to be able to put it towards compensation for what we might call the value added work, where you do actually need a person to physically do this work. So again, these are just ideas to think around. Okay, if you're running into they're leaving, I keep getting people and they leave me for, you know, somebody else down the road gave them $1, you know, it's either look at your financials or look at how you operate your business. And is there a way to free up some cash so that you can put it towards your pay line on your finances that may allow you to pay an additional rate? And listen, I understand the cost to a business over time and the potential for that to be a long-term cost to the organization. So it's just something that you need to maybe sort of have a think through around where and how you can kind of maybe move some of the financials to help when you look at how the work gets done and how you're, you know, paying for that competitively. But the other aspect to this is people don't always hop for an extra dollar because there's other perks, there's better training, there's better, maybe you offer some other benefit. Maybe there's employee discount, family discount. There's lots of things that you can put potentially into your compensation bag that you could offer employees that might help them to stay with your organization because they do value that benefit more than the dollar, right? And it could be even things like daycare. I mean, you know, get really creative. Think about, you know, and I've seen these things over time from an HR perspective, company offering these types of things. And it's just a consideration. That's really what we're trying to say here. Great, somebody's got in here around benefits, so that's excellent. And there are some good benefit packages for smaller employers, or even through your business associations. Sometimes you can get group benefits. So Again, these things are really creative, and it's great to share this kind of information. The lack of skills, I'm going to kind of close on this and then give you a few minutes for some questions. I've been talking recently with a couple of employers who are kind of struggling to find a particular skill set for their business that they do need. And so it comes back to the conversation we were having earlier around hiring staff and what are the negotiables and what are the must-haves. And so it may be that you can live without certain skill sets as long as you have a plan in place to maybe build those skills in-house. And that could be creative over funding for these types of training programs. There's lots of government funding programs and grants. And again, Amanda and the team probably have a lot more information to share with you on that if you're interested. But basically what this does is it allows you to build and develop the skills for your own talent, right? So you start to build that. And that is a huge benefit and motivator for a lot of employees who are looking for career development, skill development. It's an investment in that person. And this goes back to the asset example I've given before about people appreciate over time when you invest in them and you invest in their skill sets, they become more valuable to the organization and they feel valued, right? That somebody's willing to train them and to develop those skills. And it may be a way to deal with this lack of skills type conversation. And again, I'm not under any illusion that this potentially has a fairly long time frame attached to it. Okay, so I kind of put it as a last comment there and thought I'd open it up and also open to any other questions that there may be out there from people. So again, through the chat or speak up. The question really to you on the call is, have you either had conversations or would you even be willing to look at opportunities for what I call B2B or business to business collaboration? So just like this slide shows, you may have some common challenges, whether or not you've had the opportunity to sit down collectively and have a conversation and say, look, we might be able to come up with a solution, a working solution that meets our business needs and everybody participating, and also might meet the needs of the employee. And again, this is around the idea of retaining staff. So taking away any reason for them potentially not to stay with the organization. So it is kind of getting creative around retention. And these are just a few examples of conversations and ideas and things that have come up that I'm aware of. And I didn't put housing on here because I know housing's a big one, but I will tell you there's an organization, it's an engineering firm, they're out of Collingwood, and they started putting a one-time payment towards the cost of housing for their staff. Now, again, from a cost perspective, it may be cost prohibitive to an organization depending on the size of your business, but I have seen those types of things in the past to help people move to another location or area, providing some form of financial relief in terms of a one-time payment towards rent or even potentially purchasing a home, which I can hear everybody laughing probably on the phone with the cost of housing, but the point being, it is a solution that this organization's put in place. Oh, question about slides. Yes, just to let you know, all the slides and information, Amanda's already got back to you, perfect. Yeah, so we'll definitely make all of this information available to you after the call. Are there any other questions? Oh, question, reasonable expectation, skills checklist to evaluate tasks. Yeah, I mean, we can certainly share back with you in terms of scales or checklists. Maybe what I'll do is I'll respond to that and Amanda can share it back to you. For leadership, just to clarify, Melissa, is that about leadership evaluating their own skill sets or leadership evaluating skill sets of others? Because there's lots for both that we can share with you in terms of leadership development and also in terms of the leadership of others and managing expectations. So we can come back to that one. Okay, so we've got a minute or so I'm going to just hop through. So again, this last session was really, again, the idea of your toolkit and just taking a look. at what there may be you already have in place, what you might want to rethink, add to. It's about creating an environment when we talk retention where people thrive, where people feel valued, and where people want to remain within the organization. And there's lots of tools you can put in your toolkit for that. And then also, I think as we get into these very crazy kind of economic and workplace challenges, is maybe looking at how you can collaborate with other businesses towards a common solution. And that probably requires a facilitated conversation with Amanda and the team there. So that little statement, paychecks can't buy passion, you know, I think there is a lot of comment around the money. Money is critical, it's important, clearly, but there are lots of other things that people stay for in an organization outside of a paycheck. And when people feel valued, they'll stay, and they're probably willing to tolerate and deal with some other issues in that instance, if they really believe in the business that they're in and they feel they're being valued. So with that, as a summary, I am going to close my presentation at this point and thank everybody for your time and your chats. And just again, highlight that, you know, all the materials from this session, and we're recording it, can be made available to you. And you would just need to, Amanda will set that up. So I don't want to talk on Amanda's behalf. I'll hand it over to you now, but thank you very much for your time today. And hopefully you found the workshops valuable in terms of things that you can consider when you look at your business and your operations and your toolkits in those attract, hire, and retain areas. I don't know, Amanda, if you had any closing comments.
Yes, I thought that was great. Thank you so much, Wendy. And I will encourage everybody to, I'm going to put my email address here in the chat. And so I will encourage everybody, if you have some, there are some questions in here that we can follow up with afterwards, which we'd love to do. So you're welcome to email me directly with some of your questions, and we can pull some resources together for you. Alternatively, please feel welcome to set up a one-on-one consult with us. I know everybody has unique situations and inquiries, so happy to do that as well. And we will be sending, yes, a follow-up, a recap email that will include these slides and some additional resources as well.
Great. And my email's there, so if people want to drop me a line as well, that's fine too. We can, between Amanda and I, will circle back. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.